In Chapter 3 of A Game of Thrones, we are introduced to Daenerys Targaryen, who has to be one of the most compelling characters in all of fiction. She is fascinating and such an easy character to root for. However, a massive part of Daenerys' story is how harsh her life experiences are. I bring this up due to the fact that so many forms of abuse happen in her chapters, so viewers, please beware. Also worth mentioning that I have to, really generalize a lot of the abuse and harshness of A Song of Ice and Fire, but I also don't want to ignore it and act like it doesn't exist. The franchise as a whole can get very dark, so this is where I will do my best, but it's always worth reading the books, or at the very least certain chapters, for yourself so that you may form your own opinion. It's important to not be sheep. Try to be a free thinker, form your own opinion. Let's not just parrot popular opinions that we've heard online. From my understanding, George R.R. Martin receives a lot of criticism in A Song of Ice and Fire for the amount of abuse that takes place across the journey throughout the entirety of the series. It is a valid complaint in my opinion, as the book can be very graphic and certain chapters can be very intense, as part of how descriptive George R.R. Martin is when he writes, as he really paints a picture of what's going on in your head for better or for worse. Daenerys' chapter begins with her across continents, as she no longer lives in Westeros, as she and her entire family have been put to the sword, sentenced to death, forcing her to flee from Westeros as a part and as a result of Robert's rebellion, which I have gone over in the previous video I have made. I do want to add to what I've already gone over in the previous video, as in that video I focused on the cause of Robert's rebellion, and now I want to focus on the end/aftermath of Robert's rebellion, as it directly affects Daenerys at the start of her chapter. And it is worth mentioning that Daenerys, however, is quite literally paying for the sins of her father, whom she has never known. Yet despite never meeting her father, she's still haunted by his ghost and the atrocities that he has committed. After Robert Baratheon killed Daenerys' oldest brother, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, at the Battle of the Trident, whom was the heir to the Iron Throne, it was essentially the beginning of the end for House Targaryen. When word spread of Rhaegar's death, the King Aerys sent his then pregnant wife and Queen Rhaella, who was then pregnant with Daenerys, back to their home in Dragonstone. Aerys was very abusive to his wife, the Queen Rhaella, and that is just putting it lightly. They lived in a loveless marriage and they grew to hate and resent each other. Although it's on good record that Rhaella Targaryen was a wonderful mother to Rhaegar and Viserys, often protecting them from their father's cruel behavior, hiding his evil side from the two of them as children. Shortly after the pregnant Queen Rhaella flees King's Landing with Viserys, none other than Tywin Lannister shows up at the gates of King's Landing, declaring his loyalty to House Targaryen. Tywin Lannister was Hand of the King, who is second in command to the king. Tywin Lannister served the Mad King, Aerys Targaryen, for the entirety of his reign. During the entirety of Robert's rebellion, Tywin Lannister did absolutely nothing, as he developed an estranged relationship with Aerys Targaryen, who grew to loathe Tywin due to two major reasons. One was that Aerys was in love with Tywin's wife, Joanna Lannister, and mother to Cersei, Jaime, and Tyrion Lannister. The second reason is that Aerys hated how Tywin received all the praise during his reign, which would often lead to him doing the opposite of whatever Tywin would suggest. Tywin Lannister, however, quit his job as Hand of the King once Aerys made his son, Jaime Lannister, a member of the Kingsguard, which is a group of 7 knights that is essentially a form of the Secret Service for the king. The reason for Tywin quitting was because it was meant to be an insult from Aerys to Tywin, as once you join the Kingsguard, you join for life and turn down all rights to any inheritance, including any lands or titles. Jaime Lannister, at this point in his life, had become the youngest person to ever join the Kingsguard. at just 15 years old. Jaime Lannister is also seen as the golden child of Tywin Lannister and is often viewed as perfection. This is due to how handsome he is and how amazing of a warrior he is at such young of an age. After Tywin quits, Robert's rebellion begins not long after, to which Tywin remained loyal only to himself, refusing to aid either side. That is until he showed up to King's Landing after the death of Aerys' firstborn son, Rhaegar. He finally showed up to King's Landing claiming he had finally made his choice to remain loyal to House Targaryen, and he had even brought an army of 12,000 men. Tywin Lannister standing outside the gate, asking to come in. All that waited was Aerys to give the command. So once Aerys commanded for the gates to be open, the Lannister men immediately began attacking everyone within the city, leaving it in ruins. The Lannister soldiers attacked everyone of all ages and began to assault women, making their way towards the Red Keep and eventually towards the king himself. When Aerys realized of Tywin's betrayal, he ordered Jaime Lannister to then go out and kill his father in order to protect his king. That is when Jaime Lannister killed the Mad King, stabbing him in the back with his sword. Shortly after the sack of King's Landing, Ned Stark showed up, realizing the atrocity that had been committed. Once Robert Baratheon recovered from his injuries from the Battle of the Trident, he began to establish his rule. Robert hated the Targaryens and saw no problem with anything that Tywin had done, and even rewarded him for it by agreeing to marry Tywin's daughter, Cersei Lannister, when the dust had begun to settle. This caused conflict between Ned and Robert, causing them to go their separate ways. Once Robert showed up in King's Landing, he began to make plans to end the Targaryen name for once and for all, planning on sending his brother Stannis over to Dragonstone to take the castle back from the last of the Targaryens and anyone still loyal to them, including the former Queen Rhaella, who's still pregnant with Daenerys, and her toddler son Viserys. This is because the rest of the Targaryens who were left in the Red Keep when Tywin showed up, that includes Rhaegar's daughter and wife and son, they were killed brutally by Tywin Lannister and his men due to the fact that they were children to the crown prince Rhaegar Targaryen. So to end that line of succession, Tywin took it upon himself to make sure that they were murdered because they were only babies. However, when Rhaella finally goes into labor, there's a horrible storm that in many ways is described as a horrendous hurricane. It's noted as one of the worst storms to ever take place leading into summer and was seen by many as a metaphor. Sadly, Daenerys' mother dies giving birth, forcing the infant Daenerys and her only slightly older brother Viserys into lives as orphans. Slightly after her death, plans are arranged for them to be taken across the sea, as they're aware Dragonstone will soon be attacked. Sir Willem Darry, a knight still loyal to House Targaryen, raises both Daenerys and Viserys after their mother died giving birth to Daenerys. Sir Willem decides to flee Dragonstone as he's anticipating an attack. He decides to head across the sea to Braavos. It's in Braavos Daenerys begins to develop her earliest memories, including a house with a red door and a lemon tree. A house with a red door. This is all that Daenerys can remember of her childhood home for the most part. She often thinks of her childhood home all throughout the series. The house with the red door is probably one of the most famous quotes from the book, as it's so synonymous with Daenerys and her character, as when she thinks about that door, what she's really thinking about are simpler times and how much easier life used to be. It's one of my favorite parts from the book that the show forgets about. It's made such an impact on me that every time I see a red door, I do think of Daenerys, and it just puts a smile on my face, to the point to where that I myself want a big red door on the front door of my house. But Sir Willem Darry takes care of Daenerys and Viserys for 5 years, and even attempts to get a marriage pact set for Viserys with the daughter of Oberyn Martell, whose name is Arianne Martell, which is one of the many reasons why House Martell, which is the ruling family of Dorne, are so fascinating. But Sir Willem Darry gets very sick, and eventually dies as a result of his illness, once again making orphans out of Viserys and Daenerys, who is only 5 years old. After Sir Willem's death, the serving staff at this house with a red door eventually steal everything of value and force the two children out onto the streets. From that point, Daenerys and Viserys begin to travel across Essos and the free cities, starting in Braavos when Sir Willem dies. Then they leave to Myr, then they have to go to Tyrosh, and eventually that takes them to Qohar, and then that leads them to Volantis, which then makes them go to Lys, never staying in one place for long due to fear of assassins sent by Robert Baratheon. At the start of their journey, they were welcomed guests amongst other rich families throughout the different cities. That didn't last long though, as they overstayed their welcome and had nothing to offer due to the fact that they are the last of a fallen dynasty. House Targaryen lives on only through Viserys and Daenerys. Since they have no money, they sell practically what little they have, which does include their mother's crown, which Viserys had been saving due to its sentimental value, as it was the last thing he had to remember their mother by. It was after that day that Viserys began to become angry and abusive towards his younger sister Daenerys. Viserys used to protect Daenerys and make her feel safe and teach her what little he knew and whatever little he could. This included bits and pieces from his past in childhood, since Viserys was cognitive during their parents' reign. But now he scares Daenerys and makes her cry, feel strong as a result of making Daenerys feel weak and making her fear him. Eventually, Viserys got the nickname the Beggar King, only making him more angry and abusive towards Daenerys. A big part of the reason why he is so abusive towards Daenerys is that he does blame Daenerys for their mother's passing. As I previously stated, the Queen Rhaella, she did die giving birth to Daenerys on the day of that terrible, awful, no good storm. Then Viserys eventually plans a meeting with the Golden Company, which is a well-respected and highly dangerous mercenary group available for hire, if you have enough coin. They play a bigger role later on in the story, but when Viserys asks them for help, they only laugh at him. Eventually, Viserys and Daenerys end up in Pentos, where they have been a guest to a very rich man named Magister Illyrio. They have been staying at his mansion in Pentos as a honored guest for no apparent reason. Magister Illyrio has just been taking care of both Viserys and Daenerys out of the quote-unquote kindness of his heart for over 6 months now, at the start of Daenerys' first POV chapter. The chapter begins with Daenerys receiving a beautiful, one-of-a-kind dress from her older brother Viserys Targaryen. And I quote, "This is beauty. Touch it. Go on. Caress the fabric." Dany touched it. The cloth was so smooth that it seemed to run through her fingers like water. She could not remember ever wearing anything so soft. It frightened her. She pulled her hand away. "Is it really mine?" she asked. Now, I do want to state that I just love this description of the cloth being so smooth that it seemed to run through her fingers like water. It's just so great, and it just really makes me feel something. That's when Viserys reveals that it was actually Magister Illyrio who has gifted this wonderful dress to Dany, which is a nickname that Viserys has given Daenerys. Viserys then tells Daenerys that tonight you must look like a princess. A princess, Dany thought. She had forgotten what that was like. Perhaps she had never really known. Now, between this quote and the last one about how Dany's new dress is so soft that it scares Daenerys, tells us that Daenerys is not used to any sort of a luxury lifestyle, despite technically being a princess, as a result of her childhood, of quite literally growing up in the streets as an orphan and sister to the Beggar King. Daenerys then begins to question the kindness of Magister Illyrio to her brother Viserys, asking him what Illyrio could possibly want with them, stating that they stayed in Illyrio's mansion in Pentos for half a year, eating his food, pampered by his servants. Dany was 13, old enough to know that such gifts do not come without their price, here in the free city of Pentos. That is how it's revealed to us that Dany is still a child of just 13 years old and have already gone through so much, never knowing either of her parents or the rest of her family, as they're all dead as a result of the Usurper, a nickname that they have given Robert Baratheon for his rebellion.